How are you doing there, Phil?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm terrific. I'm looking forward to the show coming up.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting, right?
We're playing jazzies on Thursday night down here in Boca Raton. That's where I am right now.
That's awesome. And now, since you brought up the show, I wanted to ask you a couple of things about that. The new tour entitled "Save Our Rock and Roll Sax Solo World." It looks like a rich retrospective of music and stories. So how did the name for this show come about?
Well, it came about, because I was encouraged to come back out of retirement and get, back out doing shows again. One, because I was very upset by the death of Clarence Clemens. And he was somebody I knew and had spoken to. I couldn't call him a friend because we didn't really live in the same area, but we definitely communicated as regards playing. I met him first way back in 1980 when we played the No Nukes concerts at Madison Square Gardens.
Okay.
And at that point in time, we got to know and talk to each other. We actually jammed on a stage again. I lent him my saxophone, and we played together, and we talked afterwards. And he was staggered to find that an English guy had the same influences he did. Namely, one of the major figures would be King Curtis, who played, on Yakety Yak, and of course, latterly, not long before he died, he played on Aretha Franklin's Respect and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a major influence to the pair of us. And when he died, I thought, there's not that many rock sax players around that play what I call high-impact solos, And I commented that more recently. Then I was, more recently, even more galvanized when more recently Raphael Ravenscroft, with whom I had been confused several times. People thought I played on Baker Street, and I had to tell them, no, I didn't. That was Raphael Ravenscroft. And we shared the same name. My middle name is Raphael, by the way. And he was another one who just died. And next thing I know, I hear Bobby Keys is coming off the tour with the Stones. And he's like, not well. Next thing, Bobby dies. In 3 years, we lost 3 players. And I commented about losing all these great rock players, that had hit the charts, as it were. I mean, not that there weren't rock players out there to some degree, but not so many of them actually hitting the charts and hitting the airwaves because of that. And therefore inspiring young people to, carry on in that kind of tradition.
And do you feel that the saxophone's part in rock and roll is fading?
Well, there's a guy, a very nice gentleman, sax player. I believe he also loves to rip on saxophone, called John Lauter out of Atlanta. And he made it his business, and over the years we had spoken continually because he was always putting my sax solos into his charts, as it were. He actually recorded all the saxophone solos and stuff that were played, even horn parts as well, let alone solos, that had played on records in rock and roll since the beginning, all the way up to the present day. And when I commented online on Facebook, which is the great communication thing, I said, well, there hadn't been, to my recall, that many high-impact sax solos in the last 10 years or so. And as it said, it seemed to me that whenever I listened to the radio, it was always great sax solos of the past, in other words, on oldies and things. And he said, tragically, Phil, he said, that's true. And then I suddenly thought, well, let's see how true that statement is. I could be just missing things, So I went back and I actually took his list and he put it up for me, and I got the whole list of sax solos. And I just took the first 11 years and the last 11 years, which is, he added up to like a 2012. So there's another couple of years to go. But, or at least a year or so to get it up to date. But from 1954, beginning of rock and roll, for the first 11 years, he had listed, I didn't count the horn, the section work, just sax solos, in the top, and I counted the top 30. He has it up to the top 40. So I said, just the top 30, like the cream of the crop. I said, there were listed 397 solos. And I went, well, that's pretty damn good. That's a pretty healthy industry right there, and
it's a good day's work.
Well, exactly. Well, it's 11 years, remember, so it's over spread over a long period of time. So then I went to the last 11 years, from 2000 up to 2012, and I counted, and do you know how many there were in 2000 to 2012? 8.
Interesting.
And 2 of them, it's staggering, isn't it?
It
From
is.
397 to 8. And even more worse, when I looked at it, I realized that 2 of those solos were because Lady Gaga had taken it upon herself to put an ailing Clarence, who was in a wheelchair by that time, on 2 of her singles. And so 2 of those singles were hers with Clarence, who is now gone. And so, really, of people alive, maybe there were 6. And then I looked again and clamped all the years that were there, and I realized, something other staggering, for 9 of those 11 years, the number was 0.
That's something.
Isn't that staggering? It's almost a shock.
Yeah.
I looked at it and I thought, this is, and then I thought, this is ridiculous. This is an American art form. When people get up there and play a solo, especially in rock and roll, it's pure creation. A lot of the rock guys don't even read music. They basically get up there and just play, and it's their soul coming out, They learn to play from literally like guitar players learn to play rock, by listening to the records and copying them, and becoming a player that way. That's the main major difference between rock players and, let's say, jazz players, of which there seem to be abundant numbers, because they are taught through the schools and what have you. So you always get jazz players, and even the jazz is suffering because now the jazz players are sort of caught up in the soft jazz genre. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's kind of a little limiting for the way jazz used to be,
Yeah, well, it's more marketable too, and I don't think that should be ruled out. But
that's the whole point. It is marketable up to a point. You know what I mean? It doesn't really hit the major charts. It doesn't hit the major singles. Of the broad spectrum of buyers of music. The pop charts, really, the Billboard charts, it doesn't get anywhere in those. It will be in the soft jazz charts,
Now, did you study sax in any other style other than rock, or have you always been a rock player?
No, I started out listening to jazz, and I started out trying to play a few jazz things, but I was a self-taught player, and what was happening, I came from the Liverpool area, was rock and roll. And rock and roll was all over the place, It was the exciting thing for the young people of the day. Out of which came the Beatles. I played on stage, on the same evenings with the Beatles in the Cavern. Mm-hmm. And, of course, eventually I'm the only player alive who has played on record with the Beatles and with the Eagles on either side of the Atlantic. I literally have kind of one foot in each country.
Yeah. And it seems like, using the sax in rock in those early days was a fairly pioneering move, and you're one of the originators of that brass language, I guess. Did you spend a lot of time conceptualizing, like, the sax's part in rock, or did it just sort of come naturally and evolve naturally?
Well, it evolved naturally for me. I just started listening to certainly the players I listened to were the hard players in jazz, especially the guys who really had to roar over a big section. Because essentially, when jazz became a smaller combo thing, the players became more introverted and more stylistically quieter. Whereas big band was loud. You've got all those players. If you're playing a sax solo, you better be able to really blow, because you had a lot of other horn players to get over the top of,
So true.
And it's true. And one of the biggies for me was a guy called Vito Musso, who played with Stan Kenton Orchestra, and he used to just roar, just come out roaring. I thought, this is great. Then I realized some of these sax players were also in blues and rock and roll, and I thought, yeah, and they were even roaring even more, and I because I liked the attention of that, but the rock and roll got a lot more attention, you always love the screaming fans and all that kind of thing, so, as a young person, that was very enticing. And, of course, I ended up in a band that ended up going to Germany and doing the whole thing, which was it was very exciting at that point in time. We were breaking ground everywhere, and then when the Beatles broke into America, it was like, oh wow, now everybody wants to go to America and play, and be the British invasion and stuff.
Right.
And especially for sax player, because that's where all the sax players that I idolized came from. And that's what's so sad, is to see that this is a whole genre of sax, which to me is very reminiscent of that lifestyle of the 50s into the 60s of the American sort of popular music and genres of that time. The sax solo was it. The Beatles, rather not wanting to, but simply because of the flow of their success, they actually caused a lot of American bands to dive into being, three guitar groups. As a result, the music kind of separated. I want to say that the pop music hitting the charts kind of stopped using solos as much. In fact, the numbers say that. They actually say that they almost halved in number once the Beatles came out compared to the early years of rock and roll. But they didn't die. They were still there.
Yeah.
And really they separated out into what I would call, there was like the Beatle-like groups, all emulating the British invasion. And then on the other hand, there was the R&B groups and Motown, which was coming very strongly on the other side. And there were plenty of sax solos. I mean, gosh, you had Junior Walker in Motown and things like that, There were plenty of sax solos, and most of the rock guys on the other side were going, oh, we should get Junior Walker to play a solo on our records. In other words, it was there was a to and froing going on, but there was a definite separation in the charts going on as well.
You're right. It's an interesting point. You're right, because that you could look back at that point. The Beatles breaking America, influencing the scene. That right about that point, I guess you could say, is where the blues was peeled away from the rhythm and blues.
It separated up. There was a splitting going on. Before even though they played different clubs and there was segregation there was kind of, to us in England, we saw Elvis and Jerry Lee as no different to Little Richard or Chuck Berry. We just saw them as all rock and roll. We didn't see them as one black section and one white section. But then R&B developed. There was the famous Stacks of Olds situation, which was not Motown, but you had, people like the Sam and Dave and Wilson Pickett and a bunch of others who were very popular in England.
Yeah, all those great Stax artists, sure.
Yeah, and there were a lot of horn parts, Midnight Hour, all these horn parts. That spurned, that created a lot of horn bands in England, of which I was a part of that. I mean, we had horn bands that played all that music, Meanwhile, in America, of course, I would say, I think a lot of the black artists looking at the Beatles thought, well, we really can't be that. But nevertheless, a lot of black artists did cover Beatles songs, especially of the more traditional artists. Ella Fitzgerald did, and Ray Charles did. Mm-hmm.
Were you ever a part of any of the Stax sessions?
The what? Sorry.
No,
I was never part of Stax sessions. They produced, all happened pretty much in America. My first sessions were, especially the first hit record I played on, I would call a hit record, would be George Harrison's "All Things Must Pass." In fact, it was the first one I first played an actual sax solo on a record was Wah Wah.
That's a great song, too, and some great work you did on that.
Oh, yeah, it started right at the top.
Yeah, I think it would be fair.
I didn't work my way up. I started at the top.
I think it would be fair to state that to the listening audience, your music is probably more identifiable than your name. But way back when, when you started out in Liverpool and you were part of that whole great scene, did you have any idea at that point that your career would blossom as a more behind-the-scenes studio artist, or did you see your name in spotlights?
That certainly wasn't my intention. My intention was to be in a famous rock and roll band and get get, this and the other. Unfortunately, some artists get into, there are two types of bands in rock and roll. There are those that stay as a team and pretty much stay together through thick and thin with a few changes and maybe even in some cases deaths, but nevertheless, they stay together. And over the years, anybody attached to that automatically gets the benefit of all the promo that goes on, all the albums that are releases, all the tours that happen. Such is the case of the Stones and Bobby Keys. Because Bobby Keys got himself attached to the Stones. The Stones did not break up. That's the important factor. They stayed together. Therefore, Bobby stayed in an entity that stayed. In other words, the same sort of thing happened with Springsteen and Clarence. Clarence joined a band that was very hugely successful, with Springsteen, who could be more so, and they stayed together pretty much. There was a point of separating out where Springsteen went on his own for a little while, but basically they came back with the E Street Band still became his band of choice to go on the road with when he really wanted to do the big tour. So Clarence benefited from that. That enabled him to become, not that, the benefit was not deserved by any means. Clarence was a great player, was a great player, and it's so sad that he's gone because he's a leader in that genre, very much so. And his solo on Born to Run is an absolute classic, rock and roll solo. And there's many others you could mention. But, Clarence benefited from the fact they actually stayed together. My situation was the reverse for that. I played with the two biggest bands in the world, and they broke up right afterwards.
But, I wanted to ask you about that because you worked with the Beatles during a very pivotal time in their history. And, I'm just curious, as an observer, kind of on the sideline, just kind of watching it all, was it apparent to you that the band was approaching a breaking point? I mean, the filming of
Yeah. Oh, yes. In both cases, oh, yes. In fact, in the case of the Eagles, I was right in the very middle of the trigger. Literally to the point of receiving pieces of guitar hitting my head. I was that much in the middle of it. Could not be more so. More than anyone in the band.
You mean from Joe Walsh, or?
What happened was that this is what triggered the final, that's it, I won't play with you again, There had been enmity going on for some time, and, a lot of it was fueled by cocaine and stuff that got people a bit paranoid and what have you. And, in fact, they made a big law that you weren't to do cocaine before you went on stage, and all that kind of thing. But there was a benefit done to Senator Cranston, and I think at the time, Glenn Frey was anxious to make some political connections, put it politely. And he therefore was, arranged a benefit. Now, I heard from Felder, who was, not pleased about some of these situations, that he had basically been committed to do this thing, but he hadn't been asked. In other words, he hadn't said, do you mind doing this? They kind of been committed, and in his words, they just told me I was basically playing for nothing and didn't ask me, So I thought, well, so he was a bit miffed, shall we say. And they're standing in line, and lo and behold, they're coming along and doing that little sort of politician, I always call it politician limp handshake, because they've done 3 million handshakes that day.
Right.
And they kind of look at you and go, oh, thank you very much, and their eyes are kind of glazed and looking over your shoulder, and holding your hand and going, oh, thank you very much, And it's probably the 1900s time that day they've said, thank you very much. And she's going, the wife of Senator Cranston is going along the line, and I'm standing next to Felder and to Glenn Frey. And Glenn Frey is the one who is very, very important to him for things to go well and not be, out of line. And they shook hands with Felder, and Felder says the famous lines, and she said, thank you very much for doing this benefit. And he goes, well, you're welcome, I guess. And I heard him. I went pink, blushed.
Oh, boy.
And just because he thought about, I don't even think that Senator Cranston's wife even noticed. I don't think it even registered with her at all. She just went, thank you very much, and went down the line shaking hands. And but Fry, it was at Felder's throat, literally, afterwards. How dare you embarrass me, blah, 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 blah. And that went on. And they were about to kill each other, to the point where Henley had to step in and say, look, you two, we're going on stage. If you don't know any shit to, save it for afterwards. Well, on stage, I'm standing in between Fry and Felder in the situation. I can hear this language going past with each other all night on stage. Like one's going to kill the other,
Good Lord.
And, not literally in the middle. And on and off the stage is a single ramp that goes back to the thing that is supported by two poles of steel scaffolding that are holding this ramp that goes from the stage off to the back of the stage. Onto the back area. And at the back area is a big open area. Dressing rooms are off to the right. And then there's one of these doors, a huge kind of almost aircraft hangar-like door, in which there is the smaller door that you can go through to get in and out, And this open area at the back. To the right of the bridge, this bridge thing that goes on off the stage, is the guitar pit, which has all these acoustics. They had a deal with Gibson, so they had Gibson acoustics, probably 8 of them sitting there, And so we come to go off, then we finish the show, and obviously Fry thinks, right, now the show's over, I'm going to kill him. He's got his Detroit temper up. And Felder puts his guitar down, his baby as it were, and steps onto the bridge to go off the stage. He reaches it first. I reach it second, and just as I put my hand down on the rail, Fry comes past me like a ton of bricks, finally knocks me out of the way. Gets onto the first part of the bridge, and at that point in time, I see Felder reach down with his right hand, pick up a Gibson acoustic, and swing it like he's knocking it out to the ballpark, smashes it against this vertical metal pole that's there, and splinters flying, and the whole body just shatters into splinters, comes flying back, and a piece clips me off the top of the head. I'm going, oh my God. At which point, on the crown of the bridge, I look, and there's Felder glaring back at Fry with the neck of the guitar like a club. And Fry kind of goes, whoa. This guy can hit me with this,
Those guys were serious, right? I mean, and then...
I'm talking like, you looked at this, it was like the crown of the bridge, it's one of these, it's got a rise to the bridge, it's not a flat one, it's like an oval shape, and he's on the crown of it, as it were, holding on to the boat, and in his other hand is the thing, and that big part where the neck joins the body of the guitar. There's a big piece of wood there,
right.
And he's clutching the other end of the thing, and this is like a big club, and he's got his hand with its all trailing bits of strings, and looks like a vicious piece of thing that he could hit Fry with. And Fry's got nothing in his hand.
And what was it like to work, with the like producers like George Martin back in the day? What were those sessions like?
But George is a very silent person, very skilled, and very much more trained to be a classical recording artist. Almost ought him to be recording the Beatles. But they required him, and of course his success with them meant that he was then sort of pretty much nailed to the wall for life. And I think he enjoyed that position. But for him it was a total novelty. But you hear all the classical influences coming in on the Beatles. That was all George Martin. That was really all his training, and I don't even know. I think he may even have written a lot of that stuff. But George himself, very quiet man, tall, but man, he didn't really say a lot of words. Just a very nice man, really.
Yeah.
Nothing flashy about him, anything, In fact, the one time, there was several times I was working with one when we worked on Jet for the Band on the Run album. But the latter one was the actual only Beatles track I played on, which was Let It Be. And that was near My Abbey Road. And when we were there, the contrast between him and the now unfortunately proven crazy, Phil Spector, who is now, languishing away in jail, he was there at the same time. In fact, it was a monumental thing because although Paul later tried to claim he wasn't there, I saw him there. So he was there. In fact, he was talking to George Martin. So there was him, George, and Ringo down the back there. And I thought, well, this is not obviously a George track, which I had thought that's what it would be, because these people wouldn't be here if it's a George. And I looked down and I realized, we were putting brass on a song called Let It Be. So, that, and I could hear Phil Spector shouting all kind of things upstairs. And I thought, well, he doesn't sound too pleasant a character, And unfortunately, he turned out to be not too pleasant a character, a bit. I heard later stories about him, and Phil was definitely a bit strange in the brain in a lot of areas, Jimmy Iovine used to be who was a famous producer in the business. At one time was his kind of setup engineer, and he told all kind of stories about going up to the house and things that went on there. He said it was mayhem up there with him and Ronnie Spector, his wife. He said I dreaded going up there.
Yeah, and that history is legendary.
That's another story altogether.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now you've worked pretty intimately with some of the most dynamic performers of the 70s and 80s, most notably, John Lennon, David Bowie. So what was it like to come to work with such, eccentric personalities and unique personalities? I mean, was it just business as usual, or was it more involved?
Well, it was pretty much with David. David tried to keep it humorful all the time. He had a massive sense of humor that was very deadpan. He could say things that you would thought, now does he really, and then you realize with a little twinkle in his eye, you realize he's joking, and so he had a very intelligent man and a very whimsical sense of humor. I mean, I remember at one point we were going on, which would later he also used to effect. He was wearing a bright red plastic outfit with huge peacock feathers going up his head, and he had the Ziggy Stardust haircut with all the red and everything, and the blue lightning bolt going through his face, and all that kind of thing. And some of the local people we were in, he was having the costume fitted, and they were doing and some of the local trendies were in there because he was in a very trendy sort of debutante sort of area called Sloane Square in London, and they were sort of, David, darling, you look wonderful, fabulous outfit. And he would say in his comic voice, I just run it up this afternoon on the machine. Saying it. Oh my God, this kind of bizarre outfit with like thigh-length plastic boots and massive heels on it, And then the same thing, we died. We were three horn players. We were on the gig, and it was called the 1980 Floor Show, and I believe it was simulcast, one of the first ones that ever was, to America via satellite or whatever. And we were playing, I think it was the Marquee Club. I think, it was. And we were... it was being televised, of course, and we were in a white outfit, three sax players off to the left side, right side of the stage from the front, and he had Marianne Faithfull on there, and she looked bizarre. I mean, she had a black tent-like thing, which almost like a poncho, almost, that looked like. For some reason, it was longer at the front than the back, and then she had fishnet sort of tights on, which has somehow got snagged and had some holes at the back. So we were going, look a bit, and this was sort of so her backside was actually hanging out the back of the thing because the poncho thing didn't come down far enough. But it was, and then on her head she had this white outfit that I can only imagine looked somewhere between a nun's outfit or headdress, or a one of those pharaohs of Egypt type of headdress, in white. And she's standing there singing this song with him, and he's in the red plastic out with the red boots and the peacock feathers, and in addition to which, he had the great deep diamante earrings, dressed other people, like diamond-looking like things hanging from his ears. with the lightning bolt through his face, and they're both singing this song, and they're singing "I Got You, Babe."
Pure shock value.
And we're playing the saxophones, at the side, and we're looking at him, and we're in the middle of the show, and he's singing this, and he turns to the band and gives us the broadest wink you've ever seen in your life. Like, are you getting the joke here? And the three sax players, we just began spluttering. We could hardly play, because we got the joke all right.
Now you went on from that show. You went on to do a lot of the brass arrangement and playing on Diamond Dogs, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Some fabulous work on that album, Phil. I have to tell you, it's outstanding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Jeff Daly on alto, myself on tenor, and a guy called Dave Coxwell, who was the baritone player that I used on everything. In fact, and he was quite famous for playing on Build You Up Buttercup. Remember that song?
Yeah.
Build You Up Buttercup, baby, then you let me down. Yeah, he played the baritone on that one. So he's been on a few hits, and certainly all the Beatles and the George Harrison stuff that I played on, I always used Dave. He's a great baritone player.
But did David give you kind of free rein to write and arrange these pieces, or was he pretty involved in that process? Because he's also a sax player.
Oh yeah,
sorts,
we pretty much composed everything that was on there. There were I don't recall there being any charts at all. And then there certainly weren't any there were one or two for George, but most of the time with George we made the parts. I mean, Wah, for instance, we made the parts up. There were no charts for that. None at all. George just came in the studio and said, well, I wanted to get some brass guys who could play my ideas. He said, without my having to use an arranger and things. And we said, well, we can do that. And he was going to say, and he started playing this guitar thing going like, right, if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, he was playing that across the beat like that, So we went, okay, let's put that together, and we came up with that brass part, which went, we made that up, and I voiced it for all the horns, and that's all was completely head arranged right on the spot in the studio.
Right. Did you play at Bangladesh, at the Bangladesh concert?
No, that was one of my big worries. In fact, that led to the magic saxophone story. Because I was getting, I would say, miffed is the word, we can say over the air, about the fact that I would play on all these records, and then people would go to the States and they wouldn't take me with them. They would pick up horn players in America. In fact, I think it was Jim Horn who played on that. There have been several guys who have played the work that I did, and basically and gained notoriety, from doing it. But it's one of the kind of crosses I've had to bear through my career is people copying my work and getting the accolades while I languished in the background a bit. It didn't always happen, but it did at that point. So I was looking to be successful all the time and not really getting a shot. But I was making a ton of money because one of the things that really helped me a lot was Richard O'Brien calling me one day, and I had done some demos for him down Polydor Records, and he called me up to go. I thought they were just like a funny little rock and roll record. I didn't realize what they were all about. I guess I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics. I was more playing the parts. And he said, I'm doing this little show. We've got it down the Sloane Square. It's at the Queen's Theatre, but we're moving to King's Road, and we're going to do a bigger theatre. I said, because the show's going well. He said, could you come down and play the show? I said, well, Richard, I've got sessions, I've got tours, I'm going to be able. He said, no, you can put a deck in. He said, I just want you to come down and do all the sax work on the show. So I said, okay. I went down there, and it was a thing called the Rocky Horror Show.
A little thing, yeah, a little thing. a little blip.
Just a little thing called the Rocky Horror Show, which who knew at that point in time? And later, of course, after playing 3 years or a little more than that, we did the movie, and then the movie has now become the biggest rock and roll movie of all time. You know, I think it's like a 30th or even 40th anniversary now. You know.
Now, as a studio musician, right? What are some of the more interesting situations that you've found yourself in?
Oh boy! Well, of course, you know, there's that situation. There was the time we did John Lennon's Oz records, which were for the Oz magazine, was charged with anarchy in England, and John had been calling for, you know, say revolution and all that, you know, and they jumped on the bandwagon, and the British government got so kind of miffed at them again and decided that they would make them spend some money, so they charged them with anarchy. I don't think anybody in my life had been charged with anarchy. So John, they did it just to make them have to spend money on lawyers and kind of bankrupt them a bit, and you know, put a little crimp in their operation, you know. And so John said, "All right, I'm going to do these records to, you know, get them some money." I don't know why he should give them some money. You know, he had enough of it. But no, he wanted to do records and call attention. So we went out to his one night. Mal called me up. Mal Evans, the sadly departed Mal. He was my go-between for everything I did with the Beatles. And he called me up and said, "I'm coming to pick you up." He said, we want 3 sax players, 2 tenors and a bari. And I said, okay, well, that's a short sort of section, just 3 sax players. And he picked up this big white Mercedes limo. And we went driving. I thought, where the hell are we going? And we drove all the way out to West London, out to Ascot, and into John Lennon's house, which was that famous, I mean, it's got a name, I can't remember the name for the moment, but we played there in the evening, and that was just fascinating. Of course, Yoko was there, and she had rigged a microphone, or had rigged a microphone into the toilet upstairs. So and this was being fed into our cans while we were recording. So every so often you'd hear the toilet flush, and this voice going. And then it was later, John said, "Well, why don't you come and play the Lyceum with me?" So we played the Lyceum with the Plastic Ono band, and, you know, she was in the back on the stage. I was going, this is very weird. You know, so all those kind of situations happen. You know, and of course the magic saxophone thing, which I'll tell you very quickly. That was when we were looking at houses in South London. Again, from my second tenor players had come down here and look. We looked all day, couldn't find anything, put the key in, and just as we're leaving the realtors about 5:30, I didn't know that there was a magic little sector that was about to change my life for everything. And you remember, I had not been asked to go to America. And anyway, my wife came back to the door, and this man put a little photograph on the door saying, you know, a house they just listed. So I said, okay, you know, she said, "Oh, let's go see this." And of course I didn't want to. I said, no. So off we went to look at it. We looked at the house. It sounded perfect. I got excited. I said, "Let's go to Jeff and tell him we're going to be neighbours." You know, because we were living in Hampstead, North London. It was quite a drive away. We went over there, and while I'm there, he just by sheer chance, he said, "Oh, I've had some luck today too." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "You won't believe this," and this was not exactly accurate, but nevertheless, it was what he believed at that time. He said, "This woman had a sax that belonged to her husband, was a saxophone player, and somehow in 1937, I think it was, he said it was 1937, he died." He said, and she was so in love with him, she kept his saxophone under the bed all this time, and it's now 1976. So I said, "Well, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, I found out about it," and she said, "Well, it was silly keeping it all this time. She should really let somebody have the use of it." He said, "And I bought it from her." And I said, "Well, that sounds fabulous. Let's have a look at it." You know, alto, I didn't even like altos. I was strictly a rock and roll tenor man, you know. But I had to have a look at it. It was a beautiful silver Selman Mark IV, what they call a balanced action saxophone. And it was gorgeous. It was like it had been made yesterday. I said, "How could it be like this? You know, all the time on the bed. Must have been airtight or had something that kept it silver under the bed, you know, whatever." It was gorgeous. Had beautiful hand scroll work on it. And I said, "Well, you know," I didn't know what to say. I said, "Well, that's fabulous. I wouldn't mind playing that sometime." And he said, "Well, I'm not playing it for a couple of days. Why don't you borrow it?" Well, that changed my life right there when he showed me. And he said, "Oh, yeah." So put in the case, off we drove to North London. Got there at 5 to 8 at night. I want to watch the hour-long movie that's coming up. I'm dreaming about my new house that we're going to buy. And lo and behold, the phone goes. It's Alan Parsons, who I'd worked with on his project albums, doing One More River and things like that.
Right.
And he says, I've got a session for you. So I go, it's nothing new. Open the diary. He said, when, Alan? He goes, no, now. And I went, shit. I'm trying to swore. I didn't want to go. And I said, well, where are you? He said, here on Miami Road. It was about 5 minutes away by car around the corner. So I said, I think I want to watch the movie. I said, well, I think I could be there in about an hour or so, around 9-ish, And he goes, oh, and I thought, there goes the session. I just blew it, And he comes back on, he goes, yes, I'll be okay. So by the skin of my teeth, I got the session and to watch the movie. So I watched the movie for an hour, went down there at 9 o'clock. I go in, there's a beautiful track playing with all these lovely violins and everything. And I do it, and he says, where does this guitar stop? I want you to play right there. He said, no, I'll have you play out in the pack too. I said, that's cool. He said, and I think it would sound great on alto.
Wow.
I said, alto, Alan. I don't play alto. He said, you don't? I said, no. I said, but hang on a minute. I think I got one in the car. Right? So in minutes, I had to learn to play the alto.
Isn't that something?
Right? So I know, of course, the fingering's the same. So, I played by sound, not by keys, I played by knowing what the notes were. I didn't have to know what the key was. I just needed to know what the root note was, the third, the fifth, and all that kind of thing. So now I know, as long as I know the chords, I know how to play it,
So that session, which is so legendary at this point, it was the very first time you picked up an alto sax.
That was Year of the Cat right there. That was Year of the Cat. I went out, gave a thing, never heard a word for months, and then all of a sudden they come into town and say, and at that point in time, I gave that saxophone back. Until I played last year, I had a standing ovation at the Royal Albert Hall, playing with Al Stewart, playing the Year of the Cat album front to back, and of course playing the crowning glory Year of the Cat itself right at the end of the concert, and I got a standing ovation for the whole solo. Now, up until that point, I at that point, some point while I was there, went to Jeff's house and saw the alto, which was now old and brown looking and sitting on his mantel shelf, but up until that point, I had never seen it again.
Wow.
I'd never seen it since 1976.
I'll never be able to forget that story every time I hear the song now.
Well, you see what I'm saying is, who would think? And then tragically, right then, a piece of information came to us. He said, your saxophone must be, because I have to go out and buy, there's a thing on YouTube, which is Year of the Cat, but it's the one called the Old Grey Whistle Test. And at that point, they came into town and said, you better play this. I went, oh my God, I better run out and get an alto. And then I got paranoid, so I better find a 1937 alto, which I did. Miraculously, an 80-year-old guy coming up, I thought, well, he's 80 years old, it must be a good one, and he's kept it that long. So I bought it off him. I went and did the TV show, and even that was weird, because I got there and they said, we're just going to play the solo. I said, well, has anyone got the record? It's 3 or 4 months ago. I don't remember what I played. They went, did anyone bring the record? They go, no. I said, are you going on live now? I had to go on live on TV playing a solo I hadn't played for 3 months. And one that I'd played only like once or twice. That was it. I had 2 passes. That was all. It was 20 minutes, 3 months ago. I was supposed to remember all this. Anyway, so you see, man, funny enough, up until recently, that was the only version of Year of the Cat of me on video playing it, was this one on YouTube of me struggling to remember what the hell I played. That's the one, Not all the good ones I did on tour and all things. No, that one was the one that was on YouTube. So that was the funny thing, And then, of course, I had this 1937, and Jeff said, yours can't be a 1937 because the numbers are quite different to mine. I said, well, are you sure about your numbers? He said, well, that's what the Selma guy told me. And I said, well, okay, hang on a second. I went online. I found the actual real Selma lists of all their serial numbers. And sure enough, mine was in 1937. I said, Jeff, what are your numbers? And he gave me the numbers, and I said, you know what yours was, don't you? And he went, what? I said, 1939. I said, it wasn't a 37, it was a 39. And all of a sudden, the penny dropped on me. I went, that's why he never played this. He went to war and never came back.
Ah, wow. That's
Well, you see, 1939. That's when
World War II. Yeah.
Exactly. He went to war and never came back, and that's why, because he died in war, that she kept his sax under the bed all those years.
That's fab. What a legacy, right? Where you know, what that sax went on to do.
Is there a movie there somewhere?
I'm sure there is. You know, I'm sure there is.
Isn't that phenomenal, isn't it? When you think of that, you know, I go cold every time I think of it. I think, you know, when the hairs go up on my arms, and I think, you know, and there it was, sitting there under that bed for 2 years before I was born, waiting for me to have it for 2 hours.
I was waiting.
It changed my life completely.
You know, it just reminds me of... Yeah, it reminds me of something. We did an interview with a great organ player, jazz organ player, Joey DeFrancesco.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah. And an interesting topic came up about spiritual vibes in historical music places. Like for him, recording in Rudy Van Gelder's studio, which is, you know, the home of like all the Blue Note records and, you know, those great players. So he says when he plays there, like he feels the spirit almost of all those Blue Note greats, you know, that precede him. Are there places like that for you? I mean, you've played so many venues and been in so many studios.
Oh, well, I mean, you know, sadly, I mean, that's one that horrified me when they would turn around and say, oh, we're going to knock Abbey Road down. I mean, you saw what Elton John did immediately. Not that I could have done anything, but he immediately set about saving Abbey Road. Because, I mean, how could you, the number of records have been done there. I did Year of the Cat there. I did, you know, the Alan Parsons Project stuff there. Alan Parsons himself worked there a lot with stuff. I mean, Abbey Road is just got a phenomenal number of players. I mean, I have so many memories of that place that it's like, you know, well, I mean, you know, there were several studios like that in England. And I would have thought Air London too, but, you know, that was George Martin's studio. And I think I don't know what happened with that. I know he went out to was it Nassau or somewhere and had a studio, and then that got destroyed somehow in a storm. And I don't know whether, therefore, there ever was. I don't really know about the London studios now. But at the time, there were a lot of, I mean, that was the last place I saw Linda McCartney. You know, I have a vision of her, you know, and when she died and what have you. But I have a vision of her that day, you know, in my mind. I can't get rid of. You know, it's just like, you know, you think about it and think, yeah, there she was, because she was taking photographs. She loved to do that.
Yeah, that's right. She was a photographer.
Oh, yeah, she loved to, and I so regretted she had them all, Polaroids, all out on the table right by the door, and I thought it was one of those, should I take one? Will she be upset if I do? Are we meant to take one? You know, and it was one of those, I better not, you know?
Yeah.
You know? And I always regret that. I think I should have damn well taken one.
It must have been a sweet memory. Well,
really, she was a lovely person, you know.
What are some of the most dramatic changes you've noted in the music industry over the past, 20 years?
Well, in retrospect, seeing things now, I know one of the things that has had a damaging aspect as regards sax solos, and so that's a major change. I mean, one of the things that started was the involvement of DJs. I don't wish to anyway malign DJs, but we always thought of DJs as people who played records. Now DJs have become kind of stars, and then they become rappers and God knows what, and it seems that's taken over more of the industry than it is. I'm alarmed sometimes at the amount of success they have in selling product, because a lot of it I just can't get behind myself. I'm not a fan of rap, and I'm not really a big fan of the old DJ things when they were scratching records and doing all that. I'm not talking about people who do a legitimate DJ thing. I'm talking one who put on a show.
Right, performing DJs.
And I'm thinking this is a DJ. It's not meant really to be a show. It's in itself, because I think most of what you're doing is other people's work.
I kind of feel the same way. It's like I respect the art of it, but I don't understand it. I don't get it.
I'm more concerned across the board with the acceptance of it, because I see a change in demographics. At the same time, I noticed one of the things that's encouraging to me is that despite that I've never played in England or played Year of the Cat ever in England live on the stage, and yet after all these years I got a standing ovation there. And then when I played Jazzies down here in Boca Raton, and I played with an Eagles tribute band, because of course I played with the Eagles, so they wanted me to get up, and I got up with them. And they're just a definitive Eagles cover band. They call the Long Run. Mm-hmm. And so I played the Long Run with them, just like I did with the Eagles. And they said, "Oh, we want to play a little more. There's a good song we do. You Get the Best of My Love." And I'm thinking, there's no sax solo. And they said, "Well, just play the intro thing and kind of emphasize the major 7 chord there. Said, and we'll let you loose in the middle." I thought, well, all the fans here are here to hear Eagles stuff, and surely that's really not. When you're doing a cover, you want to sound like the record, don't you? Especially the Eagles always did. And that was a big strength, sounding like the record. And so I said, well, okay, if that's what you want. So I started into the song. They explained what they were going to do to the audience, and the audience kind of sat there, and I got in the middle of the song, and they said, right, go, and they started playing a solo in the middle of this, which I'd never done before. And right in the middle of it, I see people coming out to seats. Next thing I know, I've got a standing ovation.
Wow.
I'm going, this is something else. What is this? Because I thought, I don't flatter myself to think I'm such a great player that people are just going to go. And then I realized what I thought it was. I think it's starvation. I think they don't get to see that. They don't get to see the sax. And one thing about the saxophone is, above all instruments in rock and roll, it's one of the few instruments that involves breath. Mm-hmm. And everybody breathes. It's how we it's when we look down and go, oh, he's breathing. It means he's still alive,
It's very interesting.
And we use that expression, we draw my last breath. Breathing is absolutely common to everybody. Everybody knows what it's like to breathe. And so when you breathe into a horn and do that, everybody can kind of, somehow it physically, they empathize with that. They can somehow connect with it.
It's very true, yeah.
It's like singing in a way as well, and I've heard a lot of people say, well, the saxophone, nearest instrument sounds like the human voice.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that, and the number of ladies who turn around and say, oh, saxophone, I love saxophone, it's my favorite instrument, It's amazing how many people respond. And then, you see, when it's been removed and you don't realize it's been removed, it's like you're on withdrawal.
Right. Right, especially when you deliver it with that power that you have. I mean, you have it's such a full sound. It's really gritty. It just grips you, And that.
Well, I'm lucky about that. I'm like one of those singers like Rod Stewart or somebody who just has a definitive sound. I figure I have a definitive sound on saxophone, and it's the way I play it, And again, I probably wouldn't have had that had I just been a taught player who'd learned jazz. I probably have a totally different sound.
Now, do you consider yourself like a prodigy, or did you have to work really hard at your craft, or did it just come naturally?
It came naturally to a point. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of talent in my family. My daughter, I'm just staggered at the amount of talent she has. She almost frightens me. There doesn't seem to be anything she can't do. You know what I mean? It's, mathematics. She's not good at math. But she can do anything else. I mean, immediately she starts singing, and she has this phenomenal 5-octave operatic voice. I'm going, good God, that's something else. And then, at a very young age, she's writing poetry. And then at another age, she's, She becomes an actress. She's acting and doing that. On top of that, she draws beautifully. She did all the designs on my album.
Oh, fabulous.
Phenomenal designs, and I'm just thrilled with them. And everybody I've shown them to, and she's never had an art lesson in her life. So I mean, we're just lucky that we're very artistically gifted, but none of us have really had any formal training in that sense. It all just comes to us, to do.
What are the?
She does it all on her own. I'm staggered.
That's
the latest
awesome.
thing she's doing is making armor. She makes all these costumes for, the Comic-Cons and things like that. With Marvel, she does all that. You wouldn't believe. And of course, she's a chameleon. She's a beautiful-looking girl, and she can look just like, Robert Downey Jr.
The Iron Man, right?
Oh, yeah. I looked at her, oh my God, you look like a guy again, She can look so like a guy, but the strangest part, she went to one Comic-Con, and she got hit on by a gay guy who thought she was a guy.
That's a good endorsement. I mean,
Yeah, I said, well, you're feeling very successful. You're fooling a gay guy that you're a guy.
What are the essential?
That's right there.
In your opinion, which means a lot. What are the essential skills and characteristics that a studio musician must have in order to be successful?
A good set of ears. Listening is the most important thing. It's like being a film, camera operator in the film. You've got to have great eyes, and in music, you've got to have great ears. You really must listen seriously to everything. One of the biggest benefits I got was in the early days doing the Stax Volt thing and listening. I had to listen to all the records and hear every single part so as I could tell all the other guys what to play. So, and they've probably been trained on reading music. And at the time, I didn't read music at all. So I had to figure out exactly what the parts were so as I could play them. And that made me really listen right into the middle of a record, put headphones on and just seriously get my brain into the center of everything that was going on there, And that is, if you're going to be a session musician, there are different things. For instance, if you're going to be playing purely reading parts and sitting down, you really don't have to have that great of an ear, although you have to obviously coordinate with other players. And I think a good ear also gives you a great ear as to what your sound is going to be. Otherwise, if you don't have a good ear for that, you could sound terrible. You wouldn't know.
Right.
But recording is the great leveler in the sense I always encourage new players or anybody like that, record yourself as much as possible. Sit at home and play it and listen to it and then go, oh, that sucks, doesn't it? Or, in other words, there's nothing like doing it. The theory is all very good, but there's nothing like doing it to really learn. You really do learn the hard way as to, I should have shut up there. I should have made that,
Right.
Learning, it's one of the things, I think one of the great jazzers of all time is Miles Davis, who turned around and said, it's not what you play, it's what you don't play.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah.
It's not what you play. And one of the wonderful exponents of that in rock and roll was King Curtis again, back to that influence of me and Clarence. Because he would play a phrase and leave a hole a mile wide, and you go, my God, why isn't he playing? Then he'd play another phrase, and you'd die. You'd go, oh my God, I wish I'd played that. In other words, he had the knack of leaving a big hole, waiting for the audience to be ready for what he was just about to do, and then doing it and just knocking you over. And going, oh my God, I follow that phrase.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't play another one for a few beats or bars to allow you to digest what he just did. Because once you take that in, you go, oh, okay, I'm ready for you to hit me again now. And that's the secret of a great player, is to learn when to leave the hole. I had somebody else say it another way and say, music is just all one long note. the important part is the gaps you put in.
That's nicely put. Yeah, it's nicely put.
It's not my quote, but I'm just saying is that's the gaps are what are important. Like I say, what Miles said, what you don't play. That's the important part, because that's the part when the human being, audience listening, has time to digest and let their imagination get ready for what's coming next. Whereas if you just fill the air with constant barrage of stuff, you don't have time to digest it before you almost feel like bewildered. You know what I mean? Because you can't really take it all in. The only time that works, where you fill the whole sound, is when you cohesively arrange it so it makes sense. And then once you do that, that's called classical music.
Very nice. Now, what was it?
That's when you hear everybody playing ensemble, one thing, a big theme with counter themes, and you can hear it all. It makes sense. In a way, classical is a way of making the very complex sound simple.
What was your inspiration for creating the Bunker recording studio?
Well, basically, really, it was a desire that, having been part of the recording process, to get even more into the creative part of the recording process, as opposed to just putting my work on somebody else's. As well, what if I, got people in and decided to, not just the bass parts, maybe I could play the bass parts, or have somebody else play the bass parts. I like the idea of production. I really did like because I had an ear for records, in the sense of saying, well, if I did that, I'd do this with it, and I think I'd put this there, and I think, why did they do that? I wouldn't have done that, and so you go to the analytical as regards what makes a pop record really good, and I think there's an never-ending kind of curiosity there as to what, and of course you've got an enormous palette of sounds that you can use. You know what I mean? So the innovation is in trying to come up with something new, come up with something different, and I love that idea. Sometimes just a saxophone can be limiting. There's so many other lovely colors. I love listening to keyboard players from time to time, and all guitar players. There's so many different sounds, that I like good drummers. I love good drummers, and I like great drum sounds. So I'm into the whole spectrum of recording and listening to it, and it's a thrill to every time I listen. And unfortunately, the hard part is the fact that now I listen to every record and go, I think he needed a little bit more, or 3K on that. He needed a little bit. In other words, it's a bit like. I always analyze it into the old days that you have to find a new horizon for where your interest and your magic lies, because to keep yourself fresh and young and interested, and that's a lot of the reasons why I do it. Because in the old days, I used to put on a record of a big band, or Sinatra or whoever, and when I was playing when I was young, and some of those things, and it was all magic. Everything was magic. It's not until you get to play it and you get into the recording studio, you learn the trick. It's like a magician learning what the trick is,
I know. I listened to your story before about the saxophone, and it's interesting because I started out with guitar, and that was pretty much my main instrument, and I love keyboards as well. But one day I was working at a job, and it was a Time Warner company, and I've always loved saxophone. To me, that's like, it's just the best instrument. So this interview was exciting for me on a couple of counts. But so anyway, I'm working at this company, and in the mail, as a return, comes this completely unidentified clarinet with no return address, nowhere to forward it to, nothing to do with it except basically take it home. And I put a reed on it, and I started listening to, like, big band, because I've always been fond of jazz, but I was never really that much into big band. But like you, I put on like some of the classics, the Benny Goodman, the Artie Shaw, and so on, and it was like pure magic. And it was like, I can read music on the clarinet, but what really got me was just trying to emulate what I was listening to, what I was hearing, and it's been a love affair ever since, with the thing. Mm-hmm. And it's, it's just weird how these things come to you, they just get dropped in your lap, and you take them, and you make something with it, and it's just a beautiful thing.
Well, it's always, you get that feeling somehow on a total other level that there's something going on somewhere.
That's true.
Is it fate? What is it? I don't really know what it is, but somehow or other you're being placed in situations. I don't, people say, all people's lives are like that, and I don't know if that's true either. I just feel fortunate, I guess, to have been placed in certain situations and certain things happen. I don't know what the end of the story is. I do know I am now absolutely, I was looking for something, I guess, without even realizing it, and now I am on a mission. I am on a mission to try and save the sax solo, because I think it's important that somebody does it, and I'm going to try and get major people in the industry behind it, because I think we are losing some, it's that old thing of rock and roll will never die. Well, guess what? It's just about to lose an arm,
Great saying, yeah.
Well, it is, I mean, the rock and roll sax solo, I went back and looked on, and you can do this yourself, go back and look at things like one of the most definitive tracks that Paul McCartney, I know, would agree with me, is Little Richard singing Lucille, all right? And Little Richard has got a beautiful black and white video where he looks crazed with his staring eyes and what have you. But he's got his band there, and the sax player, and out comes the sax guy, and he's playing right now, and he's just letting rip on this thing, and it's great. And you listen to it, and you go, that's rock and roll right there. Look at that, and that's what excited the kids. That's what made us jump up and down. And so many bands had them. I mean, the very first band I ever went to see as a little kid, wearing a little black raincoat, I think it was in short pants and everything, was Bill Haley. Bill Haley and Rock Around the Clock. And there's Rudy Pompelli, playing that sax,
That was one of the tightest little combos.
There's the sax.
Yeah. One of my favorites from the 50s. They were such a tight little act. It was like amazing what they did, and that's all before all the production and all the layering.
Oh, but even then that's another thing. They called it recording, and it was recording because you were recording like you're writing down in a book. You were recording an event, something that happened. And in those days, they only had 2 tracks. There weren't a million tracks to do. Everything was put down. If you look at the early Motown stuff, that early Smokey Robinson, things like that, it was all put down to 2-track. All of Elvis's stuff was put down to 2-track. It was edited by slicing in the middle a piece of one take to a piece of another take, using the kick drum.
Yeah.
That's how they did it. And it was all done, mixed, as you went. You spent most of the time in the studio running over and over the song, getting the sound perfect. You would have somebody stand, you're standing too close to the mic. Just move an inch over, and they'll put a little piece of tape on the floor, and then stand right there. And then, the piano, we lift the lid this down. Oh, the lid's open too much. Now close the lid a little bit. Okay, that's right. Now let's get the kick, And they would get the thing actually physically in the room sounding perfect. Sounding just dead right. Then they just record the whole thing to a 2-track.
Well, in that respect, the jazz and classical, I guess is still kind of true to the form, because it is very much like you said, recording an event. I wonder, where rock and roll kind of took this turn. Perhaps it was something to do with the egos and the personalities of the stars. I mean, the need to be perfect, to present perfect.
Well, I think the biggest thing that happened to rock and roll, was the Beatles, but during the course of the Beatles, up to the 70s, that's when the multi-tracks came in. And that's when remember the Beatles' early stuff was all put together. Their first albums were done to like 2-track, and then they recorded them all in 2 days, just like Elvis did his out in Hollywood. He did all that, Hound Dog and all that stuff. That was, and Heartbreak Hotel and all. They were all done out with Elvis out in Hollywood in like 2 or 3 days, and he sang like 17 songs in 3 days. And they were all recorded in one session, and it was just the front half of one, the back half of another, if indeed there was an edit at all. Sometimes it was just straight through, and that was it, perfect. And from then on, we lost that art of doing that kind of thing. We became overdubs, things didn't happen at the same time, and that led to bad records. But slowly and surely, we were moving away from actually recording an event. We were more getting to the point where the producer constructed an event. Mm-hmm. Putting in a bass player, pulling in a different bass player, changing the bass parts, changing drum parts. Nowadays, they record all the drums and then they put drum replacement on there. And they start changing, which you lose a certain amount by that. But, they'll replace all the snare drums on the track, and then they'll build it. And then they'll quantize stuff to make it, they'll even quantize live sound to make it tighter, as they put it. But you're actually losing the human feel.
Well, in a lot of ways, too.
They'll put auto-tune on the vocals, so you lose the... that's one of the things, too, that famous country star... I forget the guy from like Bakersville, out in California. What is his name? I forgot. But anyway, they asked him what did he think of country music, and he said, "Oh, I think it's perfect." He said, "In fact, it's so perfect, I don't even believe it's real." Because you don't even hear a breath anymore.
No, but you see, these days, you're right, because in most popular music, the producer is one of the most important aspects of the recording. It's like what producer did you get? And a lot of times the producers now actually rearrange the music. They write the music in some cases. It's like the producer's everything. If you can get that right producer, you're going to have a hit.
And also, one of the noticeable things about harking back to the John Lauter lifts of sax solos, there was a resurgence in sax solos. The Beatles halved the numbers, and then it went on into the 70s. And as we got into the 70s, there was a resurgence with things like Baker Street, My Al Stewart stuff. But on the American side, with David Sanborn playing with James Taylor stuff and things like that, all happening in the 70s. And that kind of research, but right when it came into the 80s, just at the very beginning of the digital music, in other words, when things turned to sequencers, and that's when the sequencers came in, and the computers came in, was right in the beginning of the 80s. At that point, it goes right down, and the sax solos hit rock bottom right in 1988. And that's exactly the time when people were leaving L.A. to come to Nashville at that time. And Craig Cramp, who had played, who was a famous drummer who played on Betty Davis' Eyes or Valkyrie and all that sort of thing, he turned to me and said, "Oh, I've been working great." He said, "I've done 60 sessions in 60 days." And I went, "Wow, that's some," He said, "Yeah." He said, "Mind you," he said, "I have to tell you this." And I said, "Well," he said, "I only had a kit out for 4 of them."
Yeah.
In other words, he was programming the Lynn drum machine.
Yeah.
And before I left, the film music was hit with the whole thing. Now, that reverted, but nevertheless, at the time, there was a gentleman called Michael Boddicker who was writing film scores and doing it. They were doing it all on synthesizers, and Paramount Pictures built an entire room which was nothing but Michael Bodica and all these synthesizers. And they canceled, I think it was 3 days of the LA Symphony in there playing on movies.
Yeah.
And all hell broke loose down in the Union.
And now that whole configuration has now been reduced to the size of one keyboard. It's these workstations like the Korg Kronos, which I actually own myself.
Yeah.
But it's everything. It's vocals, it's sampling, it's strings, it's horns, it's whatever you want. It's there, And
well, we have literally eradicated a high percentage of musicians that would have been earning a living doing that.
It's true.
We've eradicated them. And on top of that, we've eradicated any huge profit out of record sales, because now they're copied and digitally copied all over the place. And I know a lot of people who put albums down, put them out on the web, and several artists, big artists, people like Janet Jackson and people like that, said they just weren't going to make another album because they said it was too much work and they didn't make any money. By the time it came to sale, people just copied it, and there was very little protection for your, what would be called your copyright.
It's true.
Music just gets stolen. That's it. And it's getting really important when movies start getting stolen, but it doesn't seem quite so important when music gets stolen. But now the big movie companies, where it's millions of dollars, they're up in arms. Because they're getting stolen. So it's gotten really important that they go. But, there's a massive movement on the other side, because people say, oh, you're destroying the freedom of the web, Well, stealing other people's copyright is not a freedom.
Right, no, exactly. And hopefully there's, we're going to find some sort of equilibrium in this digital age.
There'll be some middle ground. But, you have to also look at it figuratively, and that is, at one time, all this copyright and huge numbers of sales of plastic discs didn't exist. Yeah. It didn't exist at all. Musicians played, and if you had to see a musician, you had to go see them live, because basically, you couldn't buy a record or a video or anything like that. Yeah. So, if in fact fewer of those get made, there will be a situation, well, if you want to see an artist, you better go see him live, And of course, the converse of that is, well, guess what? Because you got the music for free, you now pay 4 times as much for a ticket. Which way around do you want it? Do you want to buy the album and get in for $25, or do you want to steal the album and pay $100? That's really where the shows on the road now. The prices for tickets are astronomical. I can't believe what some people are charging on the road for tickets. I can remember being with Rod playing on the biggest tour he was doing at the time, which was the Blondes Have More Fun tour. Mm-hmm. And he was disturbed that they were charging $25 a ticket.
Oh, it's true. And the shows, I recall, some of the gigantic shows in the 70s and 80s, like Yes would go on tour. They would have stage designs, by Roger Dean, electronics, lights, lasers. We paid $12 for those shows. Now, at where I am here in New York, go to the Westbury Music Fair, which is just it's a nice venue, but there's nothing special about it. The tickets are like $150 to $250 and up, and it's almost cost
prohibitive. I just went to see Johnny Mathis. I went to see Johnny Mathis recently as a nostalgia thing, because I grew up listening to Johnny Mathis and what have you. And at the Schermerhorn in Nashville, I think we paid about $135 a ticket. And that was cheap. Yeah. The top end tickets were like $300 or $400. So it's like, wages have not gone up that much. So who can afford these things?
Yeah, it's not proportionate, is it?
I know a friend of mine. He's saying I've got to buy my daughter a ticket for this concert. And he's only guitar player, not much money. I said, how much the ticket? He said $120. I'm going, wow. That's like $120 to go to a concert. That's like 5 times what Rod was upset about.
Exactly. Now, Phil, what would you like to send? What type of a message would you like to send out to your fans?
I would would like to send out in terms of fans, I'm coming out and we're trying to save the sax solo. We're trying to reintroduce it. And also, as regards my act, there are several things different about it. One, you will be hearing the original artist who played those solos on the record. You won't be hearing any copies in that regard. And you will be hearing several things, like, for instance, we were doing the hits all in the original keys, which most of the artists don't even do anymore. You know, Al Stewart isn't able to sing in the same keys. The Eagles can't sing it in the same key. Poco doesn't do it in the same key. You will be hearing all these songs in the original keys, just like the record.
Beautiful.
That's one thing. You know, and you can't hear that anywhere else in the world. And there's also something else that a lot of people don't know, and I was staggered to realize it, but there was a little thing happened in Time Passages whereby Al kind of challenged me to hit a certain high note coming into the first solo, and then he asked me to do it an octave higher than that. So I ended up hitting the highest note ever known to man. It would probably bring water to your eyes on a hit record. So it literally is a world record. It's the highest note ever played on a sax solo on a top 10 hit record.
Bravo.
And you'll be hearing that. Which we love, because I'll be hitting the record every night, you know. I'll be doing that on stage. You'll hear something you can't hear anywhere else in the world. And on top of that, of course, Peter White did a stellar job of writing the hardest chord sequence ever been known to play on a hit record. So, and then after they'd done that, let's put it in twice. So not only do you get two 17-bar solos over the hardest chord sequence, but you also get a world record at the same time. So you'll hear all that on the evening, plus a lot of my magic stories, too. So it's going to be an eventful evening. Oh, and we've also got some classic, wonderful video to see as well. There's a very wonderful gentleman who you can go online and see some of his stuff. Is called the Metal Guru Master, and he does wonderful video work. He lives in Texas, and we're doing some staggering videos for Year of the Cat and things like that, which you will see as we play them. So there's a colorful backdrop, kind of like Pink Floyd, that kind of thing. We've got that going on as well. So it's going to be a very eventful and colorful and wonderful evening. I just hope, I've got the energy to not, fall apart. I'm not the young man anymore, But it's going to be quite an effort show. I mean, there's a lot of work. It's going to be, we're doing a lot of work in rehearsal, making sure this show contains a lot of magic to it. So I'm looking forward to, hitting the road and making our tickets hopefully affordable for people. But I'm also looking forward to trying to get some response out of the industry. It's not just all about me. It's all about getting this show to demonstrate to people what sax solos can do. And let them realize that we need more of this.
Well, we'll do what we can on our end to help you further that cause for sure.
Oh, I'd love that. I've got a great idea. I would like to come back if you play stuff record. I've got a great idea for a recording. I can't let more than that out of it right now, and I'm hopefully going to try and involve some major names on it. And if we get it going, I'm looking forward to putting it out to people to play in the hopes that they will also inspire people. We're looking to do at least one release, hopefully two. These are single records, in other words, that illustrate the point.
That's great.
And they also tribute, very importantly for me, the three guys we just lost in the last 3 years. I can't say more than that. I'll give the game away.
Okay. Well, Phil, this was an absolute pleasure.
Look forward to hearing that thing. I'm making the demo as we speak.
Absolutely. Well, see, you know what? Send me a release on a press release on it when it's ready to go. We'll make sure we get it out on the site. Yeah.
That way, absolutely. And I think you'll love the idea when you hear it. All righty?
Phil, this has been a pleasure. I really can't thank you enough, and we wish you the best of luck with all of it, and we'll be keeping an eye on you.
Well, thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thanks for the speak.
Bye-bye, man.
Bye-bye.